Hello, everybody, and we are live. Frank Griffith is here, Gareth Evans is here, and we'll be back after we've heard
Harlem Strut.
hello there. So 1921, and that was a piano roll cut of Jimmy Johnson, James P. Johnson.
Indeed.
My great pleasure to introduce Gareth Evans this week, our guest, and his subject, Harlem. And that was a piece called Harlem Strut, or The Harlem Strut. Frank Griffith, hello there. Welcome along.
Wow, thank you for welcoming me. And I'm so looking forward to hearing about a part of New York City that I frequented frequently for over 15 years. So, Gareth, tell us a little bit about Harlem.
A frequent frequenter.
Well, we're going to go uptown this week, which I didn't realise was the word that Harlemites use to describe where they live, actually. If you're going uptown, so Ellington Uptown, the album has obviously a Harlem connection. Now the idea
Uptown downbeat.
Exactly.
It's uptown only because it's obvious, I suppose, is referring to going up on the map as going north. So if you continue to go uptown through Harlem, you encounter this beautiful place called the Bronx. And then if you continue beyond that, you morph into a very leafy Westchester, which is sort of like Cheshire or Hertfordshire.
Right.
And then you continue to the state of New York. And so anything outside of New York City is called upstate New York.
Right, yeah.
Sorry to go off on a
not
But are we yet in New England? We're not really, are we?
If you keep the pedal to metal, you'll be in New England in about 4 hours.
Right, okay.
So it's a big country, Anthony.
I know, but York, you see, York is definitely part of Old England. So There we go. Well, New York. There we are. Of course, Jersey, New Jersey nearby is not part of England at all.
We'll come south from New England, and we'll go back to.
Oh yes, back to Harlem.
we'll go back to. The listeners will realise that the connection between all these tracks is that they have Harlem in the title. And I was just going to maybe something interesting for the audience to do is can they think of? I wonder if they could send in either by Discord or through Periscope.
Yes. Let me get my Discord out here.
What about 3x5 postcards?
All of the
please
titles that have Harlem in the title. Now there are some that are obvious, some we're going to play, but there are some pretty obscure ones, and there's going to be a prize for the most obscure one, and the prize is an all expenses paid trip to Harlem, but you've got to go in the next week and come back in the next week. So yeah, if you can think, listeners, of songs that have Harlem
Duke songs
in the title.
I'm sorry, I trod on you there. Duke songs or just songs generally?
Duke Ellington recordings.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay.
Upper Manhattan Medical Group wouldn't count,
No.
although it's got a Harlem connection.
We were discussing that. Yes.
Sugar Hill Penthouse equally wouldn't, because that hasn't. It needs to have Harlem in the title.
Oh, I see. Well, it's Harlem Mania. That's one.
Good.
Yes.
That's the starter for 10.
So
Yeah.
we'll think about that while we have more music later. Yes. Okay.
Harlem Air Shaft.
Yeah, we're not playing that today, actually, but that's kind of the.
Oh, don't tell them that. They've lost half the audience now.
Ultra, isn't it? Yeah. So Harlem, really, my connection with it is not as extensive as Frank's, as you can tell by my accent. But I was lucky enough at the start of 2017, just before Trump. I can remember it's just before Trump's inauguration. I lived in New York for 6 months, and as a result, being an Ellington fan, I sort of
2015.
made my business. What was that?
2015.
17. It was
Trump started his office in January 2016.
Well, was it? I thought it was 17.
All you have to do.
Or was it 16?
No, you're correct. No, 17, 18, 19, 20. That's right. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in.
Sorry, Gareth.
So So the elections. America confuses everybody. The elections take place months before the inauguration, and so in November 16 there was an election, and then there was an inauguration in January 17.
Yeah, and I mean, when I was there, I sort of made it my business to try and sort of find some jazz connected and Duke connected things in Harlem, and there's still some of Duke there. One thing is the statue of the northeast corner of Central Park, which is right at the bottom of Harlem, which is of dubious artistic merit. I don't know if we've got an image of it there, but it's this sort of.
Oh, I do actually. Yes, you sent over a pic. Let's have a
rather ugly thing that I think doesn't really do justice to the artistry of Duke.
Well, also they put it on a huge, great big platform atop several pillars, I think.
They did.
So you can't even see it unless you step back a long way.
Yeah, if nothing else, I suppose it's quite big. But also, you've got the Jazz Museum.
Okay, there we are.
Duke's mini grand piano in it.
Yes.
There's also a Duke Ellington Boulevard there as well.
I'm wondering if that piano fills with water. It must have drainage holes.
I didn't see when I was there, and of course Duke himself is
There we are.
Is there as well, sort of permanently, because St John the Divine is on the edge of Harlem. Would you say, Frank?
Well, Harlem technically begins at the top of Central Park, which is 110th Street. But as you know, most people will know Central Park does not go completely across the island, does it?
No.
So the areas around Central Park on between 100th and 110th Street are considered the kind of early Harlem, getting towards Harlem. But technically, the border is 1/10 to approximately, all the way up to 170th Street or something. So it's a big, big area. And the area, has distinctive areas like you mentioned the Apollo Theater, which is very near where the Jazz Museum is, I believe.
Yeah.
You would know. I haven't been to Harlem since 2016, so I'm a little bit behind you.
I mean, of course, a lot of what was there in Duke's day is missing as well. Like the Cotton Club is long gone, but you can still visit the places that he lived on Edgecombe Avenue and St Nicholas Drive. So they're very much still there. There's a plaque outside both of them, I think. But really, when I came back from Harlem, I tried to do a bit of kind of research into the early years, and there's the excellent Mark Tucker book, Duke Ellington.
The late Mark Tucker. So.
Yeah. He was mentioned on a show recently, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And really, Duke was born in Washington, but I think really he's a son of Harlem very much, and he lived in Harlem from the early 20s when he arrived right until 61, when he moved out and he got a pad on the Upper West, I think.
Upper West Side, yeah.
It wasn't a million miles away actually, but it's sort of technically out. But he was a resident there for sort of 40 odd years, and his all of his music is informed by Harlem really, and he can sort of certainly tell his early story, through the place. So what I'm planning to do is just play some songs, as I say, with Harlem in the title, and just see where that takes us on sort of biographically and musically with him. Perhaps the first thing, we'll just go back in time a bit, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Harlem was a Dutch settlement originally, and it was named after the Dutch Harlem with two A's in it. So it was 1658 with the first settlers, and then it was a Jewish and Italian community, as lots of places in New York were. That just reflects the immigration, and then it was really only in the early 20th century, with the Great Migration, that it became, an African American area, really.
Yeah.
And a huge explosion in the population during that time, and it became a sort of a very wealthy middle class area, and it was a home to an awful lot of intellectuals, political, sort of religious figures. So, Duke first set foot there in 1923. He hadn't ever been to New York before then. So he was arriving kind of at just the right time, and very often in art, things sort of seem to coalesce at the right time. So if you think of, I don't know, sort of Paris or Vienna in Europe at the same sort of time, and you've got this sort of influx of intellectuals and
the pretty young things in England. Right. Both of you gentlemen will presumably be aware of the confluence of the post-war, meaning the Great War, in the 20s, the various vile bodies. Remember that?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that this all occurred between the Great Wars, the two.
Yeah. Harlem, was very much there. Paris, London, Vienna. So you've got sort of leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois. Talk about the talented tenth, and this was the idea that black people were going to in America were going to better themselves through education and through aspiring to the same sort of European culture, really. So learning classical instruments, aspiring to play classical music, becoming literate, a great sort of growth in writing of novels and literature. And this became known as the Harlem Renaissance, but a bit like, the Renaissance in Europe, it was something that was named, I think, after the fact. I mean, the people, if you'd have asked somebody in the 20s, they wouldn't have said that they were part of the Harlem Renaissance movement. They might have described themselves as part of the new Negro movement, which was James Weldon Johnson's name for it. But what was interesting about that is I think Duke really, although he's nowadays mentioned in connection with these people, I think at the time he was somebody who would have been, I don't know if it had been looked down on by them, but he was really producing art at the time that was seen as being perhaps inferior. The aspiration was to write classical works and to ape kind of European models.
So do you think he was a couple of years too late, perhaps, in developing to really be appreciated in the period that would actually have been considered the Harlem Renaissance? I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. That's possible, because it was James P. Johnson's piece actually is 1921, is kind of the earliest sort of real sort of flowering, of the movement. And certainly when Ellington arrived, they were the sort of famous figures. And was it James P. Johnson that wrote at some point was it the Harlem Symphony? I think he produced,
which showed
the sort of aspirations that he had.
Yeah, he did.
Anyway, sorry, just going back to Ellington's arrival. So it was in 1923 that he first arrived, and it was under the instigation of Sonny Greer, who had connections with New York, and was, I think, at that time was quite a lot more worldly wise than Ellington. And if you sort of hear Sonny Greer interviewed, I've heard a couple of things from his later life. He's still a great talker, a real, really kind of snappy dresser. And I think there was a friendship between Duke, Otto Hardwick, and Greer from the Washington days, and those three were kind of really thick at the beginning. But it seems to me that it was Greer that was the one that was the kind of the mover and shaker, really. So Duke arrived in February 23, and this first journey to New York was actually an abortive journey. It was almost like a sort of a reconnaissance mission, really, because he didn't have a permanent place to live. He was put up by Greer's aunt, and they were kind of living together. And they played sort of intermittently. They weren't in Harlem to begin with. They were playing Midtown at the Lafayette Theatre. But importantly, on the first visit, he did meet up with Willie the Lion Smith, who was his great mentor and the person that he dedicated a couple of pieces to later on in his life. So really, they didn't get permanent work there. They were sort of scuffling around trying to find after-hours work. They were going to the cutting contest. I think they were drinking quite a lot as well. But after 6 months, this is Duke's story, which is a good one. He said that he found $15 in an envelope on the street, and he used that to pay the rent that he owed buy a new pair of shoes, and he got his train fare back to Washington. And that might be a nice place for us to pause to hear our first Duke track, which is his adaptation of a piece composed by McHugh and Fields, and it's Harlem River Quiver from 1927.
And along with that, because when this was recorded, Duke had just taken up his residency. Shall we see a picture of the Cotton Club?
Yes, yeah, we'll put that up by all means. We'll get to the Cotton Club a bit later.
In just a moment.
Whet our appetite. Yeah.
Okay. Harlem River Quiver.
Yeah, so just to pick up the story from where we left it. So Duke's gone back to Washington. He went back to his parents that he was living with, and of course he's got a wife and a young son as well. And really, I suppose that the first trip ended in failure in a way, and it's a sort of testament to his determination that he vows to reform a band and to expand the band. And Elmer Snowden joins in on banjo. We'll hear a bit more of him in a moment. And it's not long before he's back in New York again. Once again, sort of seems to be under the instigation of Sonny Greer, who travelled there with Hardwick and Snowden independently from Duke, and were due to take up a job that had been arranged for them with Fats Waller, but he objected to playing with what he described as greenhorns, youngsters. So they phoned Duke, or contacted Duke, and he got the train there, arrived with no money, and they took up the job that they had there, which lasted for a few days. But once again, they were left without money, and were contemplating returning. But another perhaps fanciful but good story is that they went to Coney Island, which Duke had never visited before, and a fortune teller told them that under all circumstances they must stay in New York because their fortunes were going to change and work was going to turn up. And indeed, a couple of days later, they got a job at a club called Barron's, which was run by a character called Baron Wilkins, who isn't going to last very long. And they were backing a singer called Ada Bricktop Smith. So this is July 1924. Do you know an interesting fact, Anthony, about Ada Bricktop Smith, apart from her unusual name?
Well, it's a great middle name, certainly.
It is. On account of her ginger hair, apparently, that made it look like a brick instead of her hair.
Terracotta.
Apart from that, in later life, she was in a Woody Allen film. She was in Zelig, the one where he goes through history. And she's sort of playing a character like herself in that. And I think in the film she comes across, is it Cole Porter, who's trying to come up with an appalling rhyme, and she's trying to help him out with it. But yeah, she appeared kind of out of obscurity, relative obscurity. She appears in this Woody Allen film. But Duke said that that engagement saved the band, which it might have done. But all of this time in New York, you kind of wonder if things had gone slightly differently, or luck had their luck had worked out not so well. What would have become of Duke? I mean, is genius something that inevitably will be forthcoming and will reveal itself, or
I don't think it's inevitable, but it must help, mustn't it? I guess.
I think so. Yeah. So he's now joined in New York by his wife, by Edna. They left Mercer at home with the grandparents, and they're living on 267 7th Avenue with Otto Hardwick and his partner. Now, a change in the circumstances of the band. This is kind of well expressed by Ellington. He says that Elmer Snowden, who was kind of the leader, really, more than Duke at this stage, he said that he gave himself a pay rise, but nobody else knew about it, which is quite a nice way of saying that he was dipping his fingers into the till. So I think the others found out and were quite rightly outraged. He was ousted, soon to be replaced by Fred Guy and Arthur Wetzel joined the band as well. So it's gradually increasing at this stage. Baron Wilkins, who I mentioned a minute ago, in this year was unfortunately killed by Owen Madden, who was the owner of the Cotton Club. So, I mean, he's really living in a pretty dangerous world, actually, Harlem. And I was talking about the Harlem Renaissance and the sort of respectable sort of African-American society. And I don't really think at this stage Duke was really at all a part of that. And he was part of the speakeasies, and it was a gangster world really going on here. Yeah, so he's got a new long-term gig that is secured, and it was at a club that was known as originally the Hollywood Club, but after several fires, it changed its name to the Kentucky Club, and I think these fires were almost always to do with insurance scams, one way and another. I think Sonny Greer lost 3 drum sets in the course of these, but they were
well, that's the tradition, isn't it?
That's yeah. Well, I suppose that's it. I mean, if you're a musician whose instrument is most vulnerable to a fire, the drummers, I suppose. Yeah. But actually, I don't know if this was a compensation for this, because you see some of the early photos of Greer with his drum kit, and it's not just a drum set, but it's the kind of the gongs and all of the other kind of exotic instruments, the chimes as well around it. Maybe he was compensating for those early losses. But yeah, really, this gig gave them a bit of stability. They came across Bubba Miley, and I think he was the first kind of USP in the band. He was the great soloist, soon to be joined by Tricky Sam Manson, who replaced Charlie Irvis. And you've got the two of them really leading the band at the beginning, and really sort of causing quite a storm. And I think it's briefly at this point as well that Bechet was involved in the band and was teaching Duke some things about orchestration. But that's one of the great kind of losses in jazz. Those sort of sessions that you hear about, or moments where musicians come across each other but didn't record. So there's no Duke and Bechet, is there, on record? I don't think.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
No, which is a great shame. I suppose. Well, I mean, as all jazz musicians were, they were sort of living separate. I mean, Bechet was in Europe, of course, quite a lot later.
He escaped to France, didn't he, after the war?
Yeah. Yeah. So, really, now Duke is on his way, but we're still pre Cotton Club, actually, and that's just around the corner. So yeah, we're still at the Kentucky Club, but perhaps we'll take a pause here. The last piece that we heard was from the early Cotton Club period, and it was his arrangement of a piece. And Duke, I think if he hadn't composed a piece of music in his life, if he'd have just been an arranger, he'd have still been an incredibly important musician. And I think that the piece that we just heard, he made it completely distinctively Ellingtonian. I mean, I'm not a musician, but I'd recognise that as an Ellington piece, but I wouldn't know that he necessarily hadn't recorded it, because he really makes the piece his own, I think. But the next piece we're going to hear is called Jungle Nights in Harlem, which was recorded in June 1930. And when we come back, I'll tell you a bit about the Cotton Club, because this is from the Cotton Club era.
There's another piece, isn't there? Jungle Jamboree. Hang on. Why am I thinking of that? What was the... I'll come back to that after we've heard this. Hang on. Let's just do this. So yes, Jungle Nights in Harlem, 1930. Let's hope that this other thing will work as well. Got irons in the fire here. Okay. So there we go, 1930. So what I was thinking. Well, what might have been what I was thinking there was that connection with that piece, another title with jungle in the name, relating presumably to the Cotton Club decor and so on. At one time, at any rate, Jungle Jamboree was recorded by the small group from the Ellington Orchestra that called itself the Harlem Footwarmers.
Yeah, so that's in not just the song titles, but the names of the groups as well, isn't it, actually? Yeah.
Because they were quite often recording as the Jungle Band, depending on label, also as Duke Ellington and his famous orchestra, or indeed Joe Turner and his Memphis Men. So it does vary. So obviously, relating to where Duke had come from, the Washingtonians. So they had several band names. Duke Ellington and his Cotton Club Orchestra on Victor.
Yes, yeah. And yeah, just going back to the narrative, we're getting to Cotton Club territory now. It's the summer of 27. So the Kentucky Club gig is coming to an end. The contract is coming to an end. It's due to expire. The Cotton Club is in existence, owned by, as we said, Owen Madden, the gangster. This is on Lenox Avenue on 142nd Street. It's growing in fame and popularity. It was originally I think it was called the Deluxe Club, and then Madden took it over, and I think he perhaps changed the name. But it's an interesting place to imagine. It could seat 700 people, and it was according to Cab Calloway, who gave an account of what it looked like, and there are some sort of grainy photos of it as well. It was done, as the name suggests, on a plantation theme. So you had a sort of a southern mansion in the background, and you had the whole sort of southern theme that was running through that. The set's designed by Ziegfeld, so a famous set designer. So a lot of money was pouring in there, and this is a famous moment in jazz history. And again, it's sort of a piece of perhaps good fortune for Duke, but then, how much of it is fortune, how much of it is destiny? King Oliver famously turned down the job, didn't he? There, he was offered a long-term contract there, and for whatever reason, Anthony, do you know why did Oliver turn that job down?
No, not really. No, that was just
before.
No. Yes, so King Oliver at that point was still, you know, an important figure, shall we say, and had his band.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know.
I mean, he was leading a band.
Maybe it wasn't enough money.
Yeah, I mean, presumably he thought he could do better elsewhere, but I think it's one of the. I mean, after that, I think his career declined pretty badly. They wanted. I mean, maybe this was part of the reason. I think they wanted it was to be a house band, and they were going to play the music of the house composers who were McHugh and Fields, who we heard from earlier, actually. And again, another piece of fortune. Duke was playing back at the Lafayette Theatre. He's just doing a kind of one-off gig there, I think, or a short-term gig with the band before they were due to go on a tour of Pennsylvania. And on the last night, in walked Irving Mills and heard them, and he wanted to arrange. He thought they would be ideal as the backing band in the Cotton Club. The trouble was Duke's band were contracted to a Clarence Robinson. So they went off on tour expecting to fulfill their commitments. But I think Owen Madden, who'd had a conversation with Irving Mills, said a character with the name of Boo Boo Hoff after them. So you can imagine who he might have been. And the upshot of it was, I think it's probably quite a short conversation, he made Clarence Robinson an offer that he couldn't refuse. And the band were back on the train to New York and to Harlem, and they opened in the Cotton Club on the 4th of December 1927. And I always think there's a game people play, isn't there? Which gig would you have gone to if you had a chance to go to any gig, you know, that kind of took place on any one evening? I think I would choose the 4th of December 1927 and seen that the Duke Ellington Orchestra in the Cotton Club. I think that would have been quite an experience. Now, of course, I would have been given. Welcome back.
Hello, Frank.
Can I just apologize briefly?
Sure. How is Liverpool?
Starting to cloud over again. You'll be happy to know. Can I just say, in respect to the Cotton Club, since Gareth was mentioning it again, in the movie, the Cotton Club, which was produced in 1984, with a major star being Richard Gere, who actually played the cornet in the movie for real, if you're interested in that sort of thing. He was actually played trumpet as a kid. Anyway, the rather colorful character you mentioned a few times called Oni Madden was played by the late great Bob Hoskins, who for UK listeners will certainly know, who often played gangster kind of roles in British films. It was a good mate of Michael Caine, as it happens. And so in a way, he was a perfect match for that role. I don't remember, although it does pop up on telly from time to time, if he was trying to do like a New York gangster accent or just his Cockney accent, both of which would have fit nicely in that role. So just a little tidbit to give you a little bit more color and shape on Oni Madden, who is clearly not the most respectable of people, but he was probably the New York equivalent of Al Capone.
Right.
Although not of Italian descent, but certainly not the most savory figure. And perhaps some of your research, Gareth, has borne this out. I don't know if you want to expostulate or expound on
not much
Madden's
on him himself. I just know that Duke. I think Duke was careful to stay on the right side of him, and I think he. I think Madden liked him because he liked his. I think he liked the music, but also I think he played cards with him after hours as well. I imagine Duke was quite careful not to win too big against him. Yeah, so it's I mean, these are young men still, aren't they? They're men of like 24, 25, mid-20s.
Well, Oni Madden was probably about 10 years older than Duke.
Yeah. But I mean, Duke, they're kind of in the first flush of youth, really, aren't they?
Very much younger people. Very much.
Yeah. No sort of no fear, really. And I suppose I wonder, as an older man, whether he'd have kind of what he'd have felt about having to work in that sort of environment. I think it was a young man's world that he was inhabiting. Really, it was a pretty tough and ruthless world. I mean, and they, you have to remember that they knew about people that were being shot and killed, or in the case of Barron, as he was known, stabbed and killed. Actually, but by appointment. But I think the going back to the Cotton Club, the interior of the Cotton Club, it had this superficial elegance to it. Of course, there was this underworld that was supporting it, but the dancers were all the most beautiful women, according to all the people that played there. Of course, the stipulation was that they had to be light coloured. The maximum age was 21 if you wanted to dance there, and the minimum height was 5'6". Lena Horne was originally a dancer, I think, at the Cotton Club, and she was 16 when she started dancing. And of course, she was a lifelong friend of Ellington and in particular Strayhorn. But it was a club that only admitted whites, particularly to begin with, and these were people that had been, I think, they'd been drinking Midtown originally, and then they wanted to slum it Uptown and get a bit of nostalgic, I don't know, racism perhaps. And also be served drink. But I think later on she managed to arrange things so members of his family were admitted, and some of the other musicians. But you had some really notable guests there: Fred Astaire, Al Jolson, George Gershwin, Paul Whiteman, as well. So all the sort of the big names were going there, and most importantly, I think, apart from the Cotton Club itself, was that it started again. A bit of luck. It started radio broadcasts.
Yeah.
Originally, I'm sure Irving Mills had something to do with this. Originally, it was on a local WHZ station, but eventually CBS took over, and the broadcasts went nationwide. And I think that really was from that point on, there was no looking back. And Duke wasn't just a Harlem musician; he wasn't just a New York or even just an East Coast musician. He was an American musician, and his music was disseminated all over the country, really.
Well, before you play your next track, can you briefly comment on the Volstead Act, which was prohibition, enacted in 1918 and not repealed until 1933. So we're talking the 20s and the speakeasies and stuff. And you mentioned briefly that just recently that there was drinks served and stuff. How did that did that wash?
Well, I think, I mean, I don't know. I have to say, I know a lot more than you. And people would arrive. The patrons would arrive with their. I think hip flasks were the way that it was smuggled in. I mean, it had to, all of the liquor would of course have to have been brewed illegally and stored illegally. I mean, I don't know whether it would have been served kind of under the counter or how that would have worked.
Well, they probably had the police in their pockets, you know.
Yeah.
Because as you know, the mafia in America really thrived because of prohibition, didn't they? You know, they called them bootleggers, and they had this thing called bathtub gin, which played a significant role in, although from another jazz world, the great Vic Spiderbeck's dying early death, as he, as you know, passed away at the age of 30, you know.
Yeah.
And so without going into that, I just pointing out that it was a very dangerous business, alcohol, because it wasn't, and as you know, it was not illegal to drink alcohol. It was illegal to sell it.
Right.
You know, so people could drink alcohol if they had it, but they weren't able to buy it. So that was a problem, I suppose, to operate a venue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think at this stage, Ellington was still sort of he was the leader of the band, but very much still a member of it, and it was collaborative. And I think these were sort of quite hard living days, actually. It was sort of they were kind of night creatures, very much.
Good. That's a title of an Ellington piece, Night Creature.
Yeah.
Anthony will know this, of course.
Of course, yes. So was it also unlawful to brew or to distill alcohol, I guess? Is that how?
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know enough. I was so unaware of the fact that it was illegal to sell it, and it wasn't technically illegal to drink it.
Well,
so
I suppose
if irony that.
So if you had a huge wine cellar, for example, you were set throughout the whole of Prohibition. It was fine.
As long as you didn't sell it to your mates when they came to your gaff.
They could come round. Yes, well, that would be obviously a selling point on holding parties and that sort of thing, I guess. I'm just wondering, I mean, here, obviously nowadays, you know, alcohol is generally lawful, but you can't make it yourself, can you? You can brew beer. You can. Is it that's brewing?
You can brew beer.
Is it brewing wine as well? But they don't really want you to. You can ferment alcohol, I think, but you can't. I'm just struggling for the words here. I think it's fermenting alcohol you can do, but you can't distill it, or at least they'd rather you didn't. Or if you do, they'd rather you paid duty on it or something. I don't know.
This is making me want to have a drink, by the way.
Well, I've got a drink of just plain water here.
No, I mean a drink. Anyway,
okay.
Gareth,
I don't drink. Of course, alcohol is an addictive, aggressive carcinogen with no safe exposure level in humans.
Okay, thank you very much for your editorial.
So, it is true that they were...
listen,
they
Gareth,
were on the right track. They may have gone about it in the wrong way.
Okay, excuse me.
Sorry,
Gareth, I was away for a while, so I've got some making up to do.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll just sit back for a while here.
Gareth, please. Time is a slight enemy today because of our forthcoming meeting, as you know. So could you choose another track for us, please, sir?
Yeah, sure. We're just going into just to finish off with the Cotton Club. We've got, Lady Mount. Apart from some of the notable guests that were mentioned there, Lady Mountbatten was there, who dubbed it the Aristocrats of Harlem. So you've got English guests, and that creates a nice link with our next track, which has an English connection, because we're going to go into Harlem Speaks, I hope.
Oh, I hope so as well. Now, we think that's the London recording, or one of the two takes there, of Harlem Speaks by Duke Ellington, 1933.
Yeah, so this is Harlem now, literally being exported to the rest of the world. So this is kind of the dissemination, the spreading of the Harlem Renaissance, and you've got a lot of black artists traveling to Europe, and have been for a number of years actually. So, I mean, famously Josephine Baker, but I think Armstrong and Bechet both went to England before Ellington, didn't they? Actually,
that's right. And of course, Florence Mills.
Yes, yeah. And I think we talked about her a previous program as well. Bechet, I think Bechet left under rather grey circumstances.
There was an incident of some sort or something. Yes, yeah, that's right. But he was later welcomed to France, at least. Yes.
Well, Duke's visit there was much more respectable. So he's left the Cotton Club, and he started travelling around the States and playing gigs there. And this is his. By 1933, the orchestra is growing. It's kind of reached its kind of, the full size of the orchestra. Really, the complete orchestra, complete package is there. You've got Hodges, Bigard has joined. You've got people that have joined and left as well. It's been sort of going for that long. Again, Ellington, this is a bit of a surprise, because it's also Hardwick who said that he was the person that first gave Ellington the idea of going to Europe, and he said that in his early days in New York he was reluctant to cross the river Harlem. He was somebody who was. I mean, I now think of him as being the sort of worldwide traveling minstrel, but yeah, I think he was reluctant to go originally, and Hardwick had gone to Paris a couple of years before and had come back to New York and was saying, you've got to go there. This is talking about, I suppose, how respected black artists were there compared to America. And of course, Duke's still living in Harlem. This is the stage where Harlem starts to decline kind of economically. And I think from what I've read, it's really due to the neglect of the authorities. There was an awful lot of people were moving into Harlem, and it became very overcrowded. And really, of course, the Great Depression affected everybody in America. But from the heyday in the mid to late 20s, we start a kind of a gradual decline that lasted for the rest of Duke's lifetime, really. Frank, what's your perspective on that?
Well, as you say, the Depression was so devastating to the whole country, and as you know, it had depressions in Europe as well. The onset of the Second War, of course, brought about the economy being boosted because of work being produced for preparing for war, even though the Americans weren't involved in the Second War until 1944 or whatever, but still. But getting back to, there was a lot of developing drug use in Harlem and all over New York in the 1940s. And of course, sadly, so much of the jazz musicians at the time were involved with drug use, which affected a lot of their careers, many of them dying very young.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's worth saying, you mentioned Bix Beiderbecke and alcohol, but also Bubba Miley and alcohol too.
Oh, many others, yeah. As it happened, the scourge of drugs really tackled and had a very bad effect in Harlem throughout the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and then things were starting to ebb from then to now. But I think it also had to do with your point about the economical strata of a place like New York was changing so much with the post-industrial era, which was the late 19th century. So I think there was a great reduction in entertainment in New York in the 40s because so many of the musicians were in the war, were away. And that brought about the rise of women bands, the same thing of Ivy Benson here in the UK. You guys might be aware of Ivy Benson and some of the war bands that were made up of women, and they had the same thing in America. But I think it had a lot to do with just the general development of New York, and it wasn't kind to some of the certain areas. And I can't say what it was exactly, but I'm sure it had to do with policy and things. But what I'm interested is some of the works you're pointing out are quite early works of Ellington, and his modernization of his writing. I still find Harlem, the piece simply called Harlem, was a very, very advanced sounding work as early as 1950. I mean, to me, that sounds more of his late 50s works, the Ellington suites, with Billy Strayhorn co-composing, the Far East Suite's a good example, and the Shakespeare recording, and of course, A Drum is a Woman. Those were like the sweet period, the late 50s. Interestingly,
sweet spot. Yeah,
it was a sweet spot, and it was also the same time that Miles Davis and Gil Evans were recording together, the late 50s. So that's interesting combination. It's an interesting coincidence that these larger works. I mean, if you listen to Porgy and Bess, which was written originally in 1936 and 20 years later recreated by Gil Evans and Miles Davis, it's quite remarkable how similar Gil Evans' treatment of it is to the original opera, which was set in Charleston, South Carolina, of course, but a similar area to Harlem, very similar area to Harlem. And the author of the prelude, what do you call it, the prologue? The words, the words were by Ira, his brother, of course, but the story was written by a local, a native of Charleston, South Carolina. I don't remember his name.
Dubois Haywood. Is that?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
So I believe he was a local, but I'm just quite impressed with how, although it's another 20 years later, how he had created such a soundscape of Harlem, which is introduced by the opening trumpet melody, isn't it? It's probably Cootie Williams, who had Cootie was such a vocal player. He had such a vocal, and so did Ray Nance. Although, as you know, Ray sang quite a bit, didn't he, as well? Which makes sense. But Cootie had that rich and sort of growly, almost angry tone to his trumpet. And he was so much associated with the various kinds of mutes, most notably the plunger mute, which of course is, I hope Bob Hunt's not listening now, but the vocal sound of the plunger mute, and I don't know if, I don't want to jump you ahead too much, but if you have anything to offer on terms of the very vocal aspects of Ellington's music that had to do with Harlem.
We may be getting onto something related to that. And why shouldn't Bob Hunt be watching? I hope Bob Hunt is watching. Hello, Bob.
Because Bob is our good friend and did such a splendid job last week. Thank you, Bob. And his lovely portrayal of the late great Chris Barber. But I just felt, that Bob is a brass player and a very good arranger. And I'm a reasonably good arranger and a saxophone player. And he was not too impressed with my knowledge or lack of about mutes. And he's probably correct.
Oh, I
but
see.
It's just
it's a technical matter about.
It's just a bit of banter and fun.
It's best left to the musicians, the technical discussions about mutes, isn't it? If only Michael was here.
What you've said, Frank, does lead us very nicely into our next track that we'll play in a moment, because you mentioned Cootie Williams, who's going to feature in that. So just rewinding to Harlem Speaks briefly, I've always thought that's a really kind of, despite what we were saying about Harlem, a really ebullient and confident and joyous kind of track, actually, isn't it?
It's celebrating Harlem.
It's a mini tone parallel to Harlem, isn't it? Before the one. So I was just going to mention about the suites, because Harlem is it 1950 or 51? But the Tattooed Bride is before that. Is that right? I think. And
Liberian is before.
And then, yes, sure. So I was going to go backwards. So back in the 40s, the Liberian suite, the Perfume suite, the magazine suite, what's the other one? Of course, the Deep South suite. So Duke was starting to name pieces suite at any rate. Probably when's that, 44, 45 or so? And then obviously Black, Brown and Beige was very early, 43.
Absolutely. I mean, that whole period was, you're right, it's richer than just the 1950s.
Let's move on to the next track, which Frank teed up very nicely.
He did, didn't he? That was well done, Frank.
Unsurprisingly, another Harlem track. So this is, in fact, there are two names. This is both echoes of Harlem, and I wonder if this is so named because is Harlem kind of receding in Duke's imagination as he's living there, kind of, or spending less and less time there. He's still got a residence there. He's now living with Mildred Dixon, by the way, and his parents, who moved in with him in Edgecombe Avenue. But it's also called Cootie's Concerto, and again, this is talking about the growth of his music. He's now applying classical names to his pieces, and this recording is actually from, Anthony, help me out, is it 61 or 60?
Where are we now? Are we in Paris?
60s. Yeah, we're in Paris.
So 63.
63.
I think.
So
dates are a little bit approximate on this, so just to jump in there, Porgy and Bess 35, American involvement in the Second World War just a little before 44, just because I know people are screaming at their computers right now. And so we do broad brush history here. But yes, I think this might have been 63. Thank you. Sorry.
63. So 25 years after its recording, and again, so we've got Harlem now being transplanted to Paris, and Cootie playing this piece that he'd originally played quarter of a century before, and it's played at a much slower speed than the original, and it was I think Brian Priestley was saying some really interesting things in his show about the introduction to this and the walking bass line, and he was saying it's the only example from a jazz piece at that time that he was aware of. And in the piece that we're going to hear, it's slowed down a lot, and it's basically, I think, just a trio with the bass player, Duke on the piano, and Cootie. And this concerto is as opposed to classical concertos that are played more or less in the same way all the time. This is a concerto that has developed, and I think they've got rid of the bridge from it, and the full orchestra only appears right at the end. But you've got the brutality of Cootie's delivery, but also there's a melancholy here as well, I think.
So let's hear Echoes of Harlem from Paris. Cutie's Concerto, Echoes of Harlem, recorded on a performance in Paris, I think in '63.
Yeah, we were just speculating, weren't we, Anthony, about that track and its relationship perhaps with Summertime, because I think that version of it, that slowed down version, and Cootie's playing on it, kind of, I think, really brings out some of the similarities. I don't know if kind of musicologists or people that are
Frank's nearly here, so maybe we'll ask him in a moment.
Yeah, if he could sort of shed some light, because we did a bit of research, and well, you tell us what you found out, Anthony, about the dates for the pieces.
Oh, well, just that the premiere of Porgy and Bess was in the fall of '35, and this was first recorded in February '36. I was just going to mention, by the way, there's a couple of comments here on our Discord channel, so do feel free to join in there. Quentin observes that, in his opinion, the statue is one of the worst statues. Just one of the worst statues. That's that one. The one in the corner of Central Park there.
The bad statues. It is a real stinker, I think. Yeah.
Oh dear. Yeah. But anyway, and he also just mentions that Only Madden was from Leeds.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that's
why such a hard nut.
I suppose could be. Yes. As of course, just as a tribute, one of our committee members as well also mentioned that. So yes, I didn't know that. That's fascinating. I'll look that up later and just find out a bit more about that. Frank, hello there. No, he's probably dealing with domesticities there. But when he comes back, we'll ask him about his opinion about the possible contrafactation of Summertime. And any echoes that there may have been of Summertime in Echoes of Harlem.
I'm back.
Hello, Frank. Hi.
Yeah, I'm just opening a drink here.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, me too.
It's your fault, Gareth, for talking about Harlem.
Yes. So, no, just to mention.
Did you brew it yourself? That's the thing.
No, but I'd like to brew beer sometime. Why not?
Definitely. Have a go.
What's the name of this one, Gareth, please?
So we've just had.
Oh, I thought Frank was quizzing about the name of the beer there. That would be good. No,
it's Carlsberg.
It's an IPA, isn't it?
It's Carlsberg.
Frank, you need to turn your camera
IPA.
on.
Hold on. What is it called? This song.
There's no way that we can guess the beer, Frank, when you haven't got your camera switched on.
No, but I'm asking the name of the song that we last heard.
So this was Echoes of Harlem.
Thank you.
And we heard a version that was played live in '63 in Paris, and we just wondered whether you could shed any light on its relationship with Summertime, if indeed there is any relationship at all with that.
Yeah. I mean, here, let me get my video back on here. Sorry. It's a brooding. It's a brooding kind of slow drag. They used to call them slow drags. Which is reminiscent of Summertime, the original vocal presentation of the song, as you know, sung by a soprano, like really high. And then, of course, it morphed so many times, and Lewis and Ella recorded it in 1960 with Oscar Peterson and that famous Louis and Ella record, and they did it more as a swinging kind of medium tempo. So it changed a lot, Summertime. But Echoes of Harlem was originally was recorded largely by other, not so much vocalists, but instrumental number, and it had kind of funnily enough, an echoey kind of sound to it, sort of like Creole Love Call, if you like, as much as you had this one figure played, Then you had the Adelaide Hall. You had that kind of call and response thing, which of course is very much reminiscent of the late 19th century, what they called field haulers in the south of the U.S. with the plantations, and they were talking to each other. So I think it's kind of echoes. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but Summertime is also very languid. Your daddy's rich, your mama's good looking. It's very, it's not a particularly deep song, is it? I mean, it's quite symbolic of what was happening, but it was one of the more lighter kind of positive songs from that musical, which, well, it's an opera. It was the first opera of emanating from that culture. And those other songs from that particular Porgy and Bess were quite, they weren't happy songs. I mean, Best You Is My Woman Now. It Ain't Necessarily So, and those kind of songs were not bright and happy songs, were they? So I think Summertime has got a kind of universality about it that would take it up till today as one of the most commonly sung songs in music, in jazz. So I'm kind of making that comparison, but it might be different if you're talking technically, more like orchestrationally or whatever. They can also have similar qualities depending on who's presenting the song.
Yeah, I mean, Duke. I'm trying to think. Duke did do a Summertime, didn't he? Actually, I mean, he did do a
sort of, yes,
cover.
So cover
at some point.
Well, yeah, not exactly a cover. So, well, no, I mean, I think the band, yes. So the Duke version that I think of is the piano version.
Yeah, and early 40s,
and it's a pretty hard version. About 1960, something like that.
Yeah.
And Sidney Bechet, of course, probably most famously in jazz, recorded Summertime, and that's a fairly hard take on it as well. He's not really, it's not a very light number, is it? Listening to Sidney.
Well, there's a rather crass joke of amongst instrumentalists. How many girl singers does it take to sing Summertime? Apparently, all of them. And that applies to. You can all laugh out there in Duke Land if you like.
Well, it's the opposite of Lush Life, then.
Exactly. Summertime, My Funny Valentine, Don't Go to Strangers, Misty, all commonly sung by girl singers. But as regards that particular piece, I think it's, and I'm referring to Echoes of Harlem now. I think it stands out quite a bit because it's got a very vocal quality to it. But as I was saying, I don't remember it being sung that much. So it would probably be a feature for someone like the vocal of Johnny Hodges, which we talked about a lot, haven't we, in our reviews? I think we both reviewed that book, didn't we, Gareth? From a very different standpoint, I might add. But the point being is that Hodges was the lead vocalist of the orchestra. And in times when Ellington did not have a singer, which was a lot of times, I think later on in his career, in his band's career, the only vocal element was to do with the sacred concerts, which of course were necessary to have vocals, weren't they?
I think you're absolutely right. I think sort of Hodges, to my mind, became the lead, musician, apart from Duke. Sort of a bit later on, I think in the late 30s, you still had Cootie, you had Rex Stewart, you had Big Ard, who were all kind of equally kind of important. And they were all given the small group sessions, of course, which is where Echoes of Harlem originated there, isn't it? I think.
Well, interestingly, as you remember,
it originated as a full band piece and was then also recorded later, I believe.
But you'll remember that in I think it was the late 30s, Hodges told Duke that he wouldn't play soprano anymore, and he'd need extra money if he played the soprano. which is too bad because I know that Hodges was very much tutored informally by Bache in the late teens, if not, well, no, it had to have been early 20s, but I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was in Boston where Johnny was from, wasn't he? And then Bache was hanging out there then. He was a bit older than Hodges, but it does. He's often quoted as saying how much he got from Bache. And so presumably he would have been playing soprano then. And I don't remember any Hodges features on soprano after a certain period.
Early 40s, I think, was the last of...
Sorry, yes, it's about 1940, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, that must have been a great relief to him. I mean, considering the number of gigs they were performing.
Just from a saxophone player's standpoint, some of us played a soprano as a necessity. It's not quite as bad as Necessary Evil, but it's not our favorite. And so you often have either people who play the soprano or play the clarinet. Right. And there's similar instruments in range, of course, and even a metal clarinet, which were very common in those days, actually looks like a soprano, but it's thinner. So you could argue that a metal clarinet is like a soprano, but I don't particularly enjoy the soprano, but I have a lot of respect for people who do. And I don't remember it as a solo voice in Ellington's band after about 1945 or so, But obviously, they all could play it, but he didn't write for it that much, which is interesting because soprano sax really came out and had a kind of a second coming in the 60s with the advent of Coltrane.
And, didn't Carney play the soprano a bit?
I think they all played all the saxes.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm just slightly aware of the fact that we have a meeting with the lads in about a half an hour.
Oh, lads get together.
Let's move on to the next.
It's a full day session for us here at Desert Towers, I tell you. So, yes, so anyway, so soprano saxophone. I mean, obviously one thinks of Sidney Bechet, you mentioned earlier. Sidney was briefly in the Ellington fraternity, as it were, and obviously he played clarinet and soprano saxophone.
We're going to move from one concerto to another, although effectively it is a concerto, although it wasn't really called that. So this is another piece with Harlem in the title, unsurprisingly, Bluebells of Harlem, which is one of these interesting, obscure Ellington pieces. And I thought I'd perhaps pick this rather than Harlem Air Chap, which we're all pretty familiar with I think. So, again, just in terms of the Ellington story, you've got Harlem now relocating to Carnegie Hall, which is the most prestigious kind of venue in New York at the time. So we're going from Uptown to downtown, or Midtown, I suppose, isn't it, really? And we've got really a piece of concert jazz here that was commissioned by Paul Whiteman. And it was one of 6 pieces that was by different composers, and some of them were sort of light classical composers, and Ellington was now in the mix of these people from in 1923, rubbing shoulders with gangsters. He's now in sort of high society in Hollywood. It was for a 40-minute anthology called Those Bells, BELLS, and the theme, each title was supposed to be connected to bells of some sort. Typically, Ellington kind of inverted that or had a pun on it, and it became Bells, BELLES, women. So we've got the Bluebells of Harlem. So is it the women of Harlem, possibly?
Possibly so, yes.
It wasn't recorded by or it wasn't played by Ellington in 38, it was played by the Whiteman Orchestra. And this version that we're going to hear is from 43, from one of the Carnegie Hall concerts that are available on Prestige, aren't they? It's effectively a concerto for piano and orchestra. I think it's quite Gershwin-esque. It was it was dropped from the repertoire, but I think it was kind of superseded really by New World the Coming, which was another longer piece, and perhaps Ellington thought this was a more successfully realised piece, and actually that was one of the first pieces where his piano was really to the fore in this piece. But you can hear, his piano used interestingly here. This is a Billy Strayhorn arrangement that was played in Carnegie Hall, 43. Okay.
Oh, there we go. So that, I think, was that from the first Carnegie Hall concert that Duke played in January 43. Bluebells of
Yeah,
Harlem.
that was the first year, wasn't it? I think, yeah. Bluebells of Harlem. We're running out of time, guys. I'll just wrap
no,
it
not
up
again.
and hang over to you. Just to finish the story, we're going to end up with the piece Harlem, which is the piece that was now he's having pieces commissioned by classical conductors, commissioned by Toscanini in 51, I think. So this was a piece that was written for to be played by Toscanini's orchestra. And this is really, I suppose, this is his Harlem. You could call it the Harlem Symphony, couldn't you? Really, when you listen to it, it's a long piece. By now, Ellington is part of the Harlem aristocracy. He's living in West Harlem. I think East Harlem has gone into decline, and I mean, is really been described as a ghetto. Unfortunately, the economic decline continues. Gangs and drugs are there. Ellington's friends with Arthur Logan. Strayhorn is living there as well. And one of the features of life in Harlem was that unfortunately Strayhorn in 54 was mugged as he got out of a taxi, and I think he was beaten up quite badly. But typically for him, I think the thing that he was most concerned was not his own health, but was for saving the ring that Lena Horne gave to him as a present. And I think he sort of, as he was being beaten up, he managed to hide it in some sand that was outside a building that was having work done to it. He found it there the next day, apparently. But yeah, we'll end with Harlem. Now, this isn't the original recording. There are many versions of it. I picked a late version because Ellington continued playing this to the end of his life, the very end of his time with the band. And really, Ellington had left Harlem, but Harlem, always remained part of Ellington. And a bit like James Joyce leaving Dublin, the writer, it always remained in his imagination, I think. And this is a real. You'll hear from the introduction the love and warmth that Ellington had for the place.
Can I just throw in a couple of things here?
We have some notices, and then we'll get on. Yeah, and we'll get out of here with Harlem.
Before I forget, well, Desik, the meeting might have to start a couple of minutes late.
Let's not worry about the business meeting that we've got coming up. This is far more important.
Yes. Okay. First of all, before I forget, the eminent Ellington scholar, arranger, composer Dave Berger, who's based in New York City and, of course, is, I'm sure, a member of the New York City Ellington Society, is doing a workshop, composition and arranging sort of workshop demonstrating Ellington techniques on Sunday, which is the 21st this week. It'll be at 2:00 American, Eastern Standard Time, which makes it 6:00 here in the UK. Okay, the hours difference is changed for 2 weeks before England moves
crazy stuff. It's interregnum.
Spring forward, spring ahead.
That's what it is. Spring ahead. Why on earth?
So that's 6:00 UK time.
Why they do
and
that?
If you want, hold on.
It's a slightly typical, slightly insular American thing to do. But on the other hand, the rest of the world could follow suit, as indeed they no doubt will. At some
time
point.
is not on our side here. Anyway, if you want to enroll, either send us a message on our Facebook page, and I'll get back to you with the information. Duke Ellington Society, United Kingdom. Or no, it's Duke Ellington Society UK on Facebook. Okay?
That's what it is on Facebook, yes.
Or log on to suchsweetthunder.com. Such Sweet Thunder. That's David Berger's website.
And this is David Berger. This is the start of what is planned to be a year-long online symposium, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant richness of sources. David transcribed hundreds of Ellington pieces, and many of which are played currently by the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. David was the music director for the LCJO in the late 1980s, which has been running ever since. So he's got extremely good credibility in this field.
And there is a presentation or interview or something available as a kind of precursor to this series already. There is a link to Vimeo. It didn't work for me, but it will probably work for some other people. So have a look at that.
It did for me. I thoroughly recommend listening to it. He did a presentation on Harlem, as luck would have it.
Good.
Which was fascinating. On not the place, but on this particular track.
And the other thing I'd like to plug is I've just started doing a weekly radio show online, which is called. Can you show the thing, Anthony, or should I?
I've got the thing up there. Yes.
Okay, it's called My Kinda Music 24.com. It's an online only station based in the Wirral, which is this obscure part of northwest England. And as I said, it's 9 p.m. UK time every Thursday night. It also rebroadcasts on Sundays at 6 p.m.
Wow.
Which, of course, is conveniently exactly the same time as David Berger's workshop.
So is this available to order as well as when it's actually fed out from them? Can you?
It's available to all over the world. Is that what you mean?
Sorry, no. I meant can one just go there at any time and have a listen? Is it on demand?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay, so that's great. And I'll just wait by the telephone, for an invitation to appear on your program, Frank. Very good stuff. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
So that was last week that you started that, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
We're doing one tomorrow on the music of the cool period, which was the 1950s.
Okay.
Jazz. So, Anthony, tell us about what our next Gareth already told us. So we're looking forward to
let's talk about our next program. The wonderful Claire Foster will be joining us on the songs of Duke Ellington. That's her subject next Wednesday. And then after that, we've got Matthias Heyman on Jimmy Blanton. And a whole lot of other people lined up for April.
Next month, just to mention that one of our guests, first of all, on 7th of April, we'll be having Ian Bradley, who's been a guest 2 or 3 times on Uptown Lockdown, and always has some wonderful treats. He's a big fan, as I am, of Paul Gonsalves, so that'll be nice. And then following him on the 14th of next month, we'll have Sebastian Scotney, who is the gaffer of a well-known jazz website in the UK called londonjazznews.com. So that'll be great to look forward to.
2 of my favourite things and one thing that I forbear, London Jazz and News there.
And then finally, our first anniversary, celebrating 12 months of Uptown Lockdown, although many of you might think it seems to be a lot longer.
Is it only 1 year? Oh,
that was a joke, Gareth, just in case. And it'll feature 2 of our most popular and favorite guests, the great Brian Priestley and the singer Louise Gibbs.
Oh, that'll be fantastic.
So we really look forward to the next 6 weeks.
And we have an opening, don't we? Somebody wishes to join us as a guest on the 21st, is it, I guess? Then, of course, we would enjoy doing a program then as well. Or we might have a week off, who knows?
But can I just say to you, Gareth, thank you so much. It's so enjoyable for me to actually be here with you and talk and just trace this rich history of a very important part of American history of jazz and New York City history as well. They're both really intertwined. So kind of neatly.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed looking into it, and really enjoyed the chat that we had today.
Yeah. Oh, Gareth, thank
you. I'll see you at the meeting.
See you in about a quarter of an hour. Yeah. So anyway, Gareth, wonderful. Thank you so much for putting that together and being with us this afternoon. Marvellous stuff. So this is from Uppsala, not Uppsalem, as I sometimes might refer to it. And it's the live recording here from what, 70? Oh, when was this? 71?
71.
Wow, yes. So of Duke Ellington's composition, Harlem.
Our next selection, ladies and gentlemen, is one of our longer works. It's a tone parallel to Harlem. Harlem you may have heard of, Harlem you may not have heard of. It's a lovely little community in New York City between 110th Street and 145th Street, bordered on the east by the Harlem River, on the west by the Hudson River. The people who live there are outstanding and have such a lovely reputation for being so handsome. But in spite of their rare beauty, we are really good people. At one time, we were even represented in Congress by a minister. And right now, we'd like to take you on an early morning, Sunday morning little visit up 7th Avenue, starting at 110th Street, up through the Latin neighborhood, the Spanish, the West Indian, up through the business district, and up through the churches. There are more churches than cabarets. And you may see an Elks parade go by. You may see a funeral go by. And you may see a hip chick standing on the corner under a lamppost. And you may recognize the time when we're making our social significance demands. Cootie Williams will be the first to pronounce the word Harlem.